My wife and I are avid bird watchers. Believe it or not, there is a lot of competition in our circle. Rare sightings will give you bragging rights and kudos for weeks. I'm ashamed to admit that wanting that one-upmanship started to take over form of common sense, sometimes putting us in danger. It was never intended. I guess with anything, there could be a sense of adrenaline and addiction. It doesn't have to come from a drug. Our vices are all different, and even something as innocuous as birdwatching can lead to mortal peril if you're not careful. You see, I had heard through the grapevine about a very rare species indeed that had allegedly made a nest in the Blackwater Woods up here in Massachusetts. This was almost unprecedented, and I knew that we had to go see it if we could spot and get a photo of such a rarity. Oh, what a coup it could be. Of course, we knew the rumors about the woods. Everybody around here did. But we study birds, not cryptozoology or strange mythical beasts. We didn't believe in such things. We wanted to see the rare bird family. We never even considered anything else. As I had pointed out many times, we study birds. We are not hunters. We admire all nature, but usually, we do not openly walk into a predator's lair either. So, we do not go seeking photographic evidence if we are likely to encounter a bear or a wolf, for example. We don't head into places where there are deer and men with guns. But on this occasion, we didn't do our homework. Or at the least, we actively chose to ignore the warning signs, as we were too concerned with the birds, which was how we, two middle-aged, not as fit as we once were, twitchers, ended up coming face to face with the Blackwater Woods Dogman. Everyone knows the best time to spot birds is very early in the morning. Dawn, to be precise. So, my wife and I set the alarm clock for 4 in the morning, and just before 5, we were heading out stealthily through the woods, deep down to the spot where the nest had been allegedly spotted. Once we had gotten to the desired location, we nestled ourselves into the undergrowth as best we could. Cameras at the ready, for as soon as we heard the first note of the dawn. Only it was unnaturally quiet. We hadn't really noticed until that point, as we had been trying our utmost to blend in. But now, it was only too obvious that there wasn't a peep to be heard. Unusual for a place full of nocturnal beings. But again, we were so focused on our prize that it clouded our judgment. Even when we heard the crunching, we weren't afraid. More annoyed that something was making a noise and potentially scuppering our sighting. It still didn't occur to us that it was the first noise that we had heard since entering the woods. I saw my wife frowning and straining her neck to try and see what was making all that calamity. It seemed too heavy underfoot to be an innocent rabbit or woodchuck. Then we heard a noise that was an unmistakable growl. Both of us shook. Crunching leaves was one thing. Something that emitted a low growl was a whole other ballgame. Still, we were fairly well hidden, and somewhat expert at camouflaging ourselves. So, I placed a finger to my lips, indicating if we stayed still and quiet, all should be fine. More crunching, stomping through the undergrowth. Then, far too close for comfort, another growl, and short, raspy breaths. I will admit that now. We were both more than a little trepidatious about what we had just heard out there making that noise. There were two things that stuck out the most at that point, rising our fear level and indicating that we had indeed been foolish to dive into this adventure ill-prepared. One was that whatever was making those hostile noises was very close by. And two, rightfully even more disturbing, the sound was originating from above. We were sat on the ground, hidden by some of the low branches and bushes, but even at a kneeling level, we should still have towered above most wildlife. Whatever was approaching was far taller, and that was unnerving. And then, using an intelligence that seemed more than animal, it parted the branches so it could get a proper look at us. I screamed. My wife screamed. I am unsure as to whether it did or not. That is not to say I am adverse for straining my vocal cords, but I was more frozen in fear. We are not well versed in canine peculiarities or cryptid encounters. Yet, staring at us, not even 10 feet away, was something I wouldn't have believed in or believed to be possible had I not witnessed it with my own eyes. There was no doubting this was a bipedal, canine humanoid, resplendent with the hock joints on the leg, just like the hind legs on a regular quadrupedal. The head, for the most part, resembled a German shepherd, even complete with pricked ears. Yet the eyes were uncannily human. All in all, a simple, terrifying Dogman. Although it made no move to suggest it might set upon us, just its very existence and presence was more than enough, and we ran, as fast as our older bones would carry us back to our vehicle. Scarce bird sightings were not worth our lives. Once we arrived back home, and our hearts stopped threatening to burst out of our chest, we did some research, and it would appear if we had not been so taken into the vulgarity of getting over the others, we may have read about the Dogman sightings that occur very often around here. I was out panning for gold. Yes, that is still a thing. Though it's something you do just for fun, more than just trying to strike it rich. There's nothing quite like washing away the dirt and silt and finding a few grains of gold. With patience, it can add up and give you some neat pocket change. Of course, you won't get rich. It's a lot like fishing. You don't plan on landing anything that will get you in the Guinness World Book of Records. You do it more just to have an excuse to be outside and be alone. And if you actually walk away with something to show for it, then hey, it's been a good day. If I ever go painting again, I'm probably going to be going with somebody else from now on, or at least invite a friend. Painting is a repetitive activity. You become lulled by it almost into a trance of some kind. You are dipping your pan in the water and hearing the slosh. You're looking for the glint among the dirt. You can lose track of time easily. That's why, I think, I didn't see the situation I was in until it was rather too late to do anything about it. I'm questioning at this point if I had to be so afraid. I looked up in order to take a stretch. My back had been bent like that for too long, and I'm not exactly getting younger. That's when I saw a thing perched on a nearby boulder, staring at me. It didn't appear relaxed. It appeared to be on high alert, but it did not look like it was ready to attack me either. I think it was deciding what to think of me, like it wasn't sure just how much meat I had on me. It could have easily been a Bigfoot, except I don't think Bigfoot has the head of a black or a gray wolf. The features of the head and the face were oversized. A wolf's face is pleasing and symmetrical. This thing almost looked like it failed the genetic lottery with the way its cheeks were swollen, and its mouth was oversized, and the snout was long enough to make even Pinocchio jealous. It had a tail that looked kind of beat up and abused. Now, what was awful was the eyes. The rest of it could have stood the sight if it weren't for the intensity of the eyes. They seemed to burn this golden amber color. I couldn't even tell if they were just highly reflective or if they actually had a real light to them. You know, like biolight, like fireflies or jellyfish. I did take a moment to pinch myself to make sure I really was seeing this and I wasn't asleep or having a bad dream. I'm sorry to say that I didn't wake up. I was taking my sweet time, deciding just how I was going to deal with this situation at hand. Obviously, this was some unknown creature, and I had no idea what I was dealing with. Omnivore, carnivore, predator. Should I run? I had a vision of it leaping down and eating me alive with my back like I'm an oversized drumstick. Or should I have stood my ground and defended myself with my rusty little pan? Either way, I would lose. The thing just sat there staring, and I figured that it must have been waiting for me to make the first move. As slowly as I could, I stood up and started to back away from the thing. This got it to curl its lips at me and show those awful black gums that had pink and yellow teeth. They looked sharper than steak knives. I began backing away, not daring to turn my back on the monster. Its muscles rippled, and the light in its eyes flashed. Rational thinking started to lose its grip, and I began walking backwards at an unsafe clip, desperately feeling my way behind me with one hand. I was holding onto my pan, and I didn't know why. It wasn't going to do me any good if it attacked me. I slowly made my way the way I had come. When the monster was out of view, I looked behind me to make sure I was going the right way. Looking back in front of me, the monster had followed. I pretty much decided that I was dead meat. So I walked backwards, and this thing kept following me. It kept the same hostile stance, teeth bared. But then it stopped at some point, and it watched me continue to walk backwards. I checked my path a few more times with glances over my shoulder, and when I looked back in front of me, this thing hadn't advanced. It let me go. I find myself overthinking why it had let me go. Did I smell bad? All kidding aside, I think I might have stumbled upon its zone or territory. Maybe its den was nearby. I don't know. I can't even picture what Wolfman pups even look like. All I know is that I'm not going back to that spot in Alaska anytime soon. Not without more guns and a good traveling companion. My husband has smoked for years, and most of the time, he gets his nicotine fix in the day, so doesn't need one when he gets home in the evenings. Sometimes, though, especially when work is stressful, he tends to like a cigarette before bed. Of course, because we have kids in the house, I make him smoke it outside, on the porch, or even in the yard, if the weather permits. On this particular evening, however, he was very stressed out, and was just lighting the second cigarette when he claims he heard a noise. It's not totally unusual to hear all sorts of racket out there. After all, we do live in a busy neighborhood. Plenty of people get pets, and raccoons sometimes get into dumpsters, and they can make a hell of a lot of noise. We've had problems with them and possums before. It wouldn't be the first, or the last. It sounded like one of the neighbor's dogs to start with, which of course meant our schnauzer beginning to growl and yipping, and he even saw the cat whiz past him back into the house, which was slightly unusual as he loved to hunt mice at night. Still, he wasn't worried, and he took a walk down to the fence with the smoke to see if he could tell why the dogs were getting in a tiz. He didn't see anything to start with, so was about to head back up to the house when he heard another noise. This was a very deep growling rumbling sound. He described it as guttural, like a wolf might make, or a big dog. He began to feel some anxiety. If there was some kind of wild dog on the loose, it could cause all sorts of issues and potentially hurt or kill some of the local pets. He'd already seen the cat head inside, and now he dragged Betsy back indoors too, despite her yipping and growling in retort. Once the pets were locked in, he went back over to the fence again to see if he could see what animal it was. He could hear some rustling and panting from the other side, so he knew it was close. Then he saw it. To put in some perspective, the fence is just under 6 feet all around. My husband is 6'2". The thing he saw was taller than the fence, as he could see an entire head with glowing luminous yellow eyes looking right at him. We've got a security light on the porch which illuminates the yard enough to detract any would-be trespassers, as he was able to see that the head peering over the fence with the eyes did not appear to be human or completely animal. It resembled a dog, but it clearly wasn't a dog. Despite it being late, and as I have said, I was feeling stressed that day, and so was he. He swears what he saw, which would mean that behind that fence had to have been some kind of dog, roughly 6'4". By now, I had come downstairs to see what on earth was going on, as both the dog and the cat were going nuts in the kitchen. Betsy was going crazy, baring her teeth, and the cat seemed very panicked. I opened the porch door and near enough gave Tom a heart attack. When he looked back, the thing was gone, and that's when he told me what he'd seen. I had the good sense to tell him to get back inside and lock the door. I don't know exactly what was out there, whether 6 feet dog exist, but he saw something there for sure, and the pets were really freaked out too. I believe him. I owned a small ranch. I was very limited when it came to modern amenities, and I barely had any help. So when something needed done, it was most often done by me, especially when there was a storm or harsh weather on the way. It was up to me to gather the animals into the barn, or else I would be looking at replacing all of my livestock, and that's the best way for a farmer like me to go broke. So, you can imagine my dismay when one morning, after an especially fierce storm, I go into the barn and I find 3 or 4 of my sheep lying dead in the middle of the barn floor, and the rest of my animals cowering against a far wall. Shocked, puzzled, my first reaction was to look at the surviving animals for evidence that they had been trampled or attacked, perhaps in a moment of panic or freak aggression. There was no evidence of any kind. So the next logical explanation was that there was a predator in the barn before I had shut the animals inside. I ushered the survivors outside, and I immediately shut up the barn to go inside and get my shotgun. I went back and out through those doors again, nervous but mad. Dead animals are lost money. You could have heard a pin drop inside that barn. There wasn't even a mouse scratching around. My instincts screamed at me that I was alone, and that was a sign that whatever had killed my sheep couldn't have gotten too far, even if the mice were frightened. The angle of sunlight made it hard to see up into the rafters where any killer could be hunkered down, if there was one. My eyes must have combed those beams up there for at least 15 minutes, when I could finally make out a shape that just didn't seem to belong. I couldn't have told you what it was, but I knew it was big. It was holding so still that it must have been holding its breath. And that made me wonder if it was some sort of bandit or vagabond or madman, something of that sort. It was too big, and its survival instincts were far too sharp. I thought it was a person, initially. Why would I have any reason to suspect otherwise? I yelled at it to come down, and I was going to call the police. There wasn't an answer, but I swear to God Almighty that I could then see two yellow golden eyes looking down at me where a head ought to be. They weren't reflective like a cat's eyes. They appeared to have a glow to them. I considered for a moment that a Halloween decoration had been put up in my barn to throw me off the trail of the real vandal. But then those eyes blinked and shifted as they looked around and around me. I knew then this was no decoy. I stepped back to see the shape of something not only tall, but muscle-bound in unnatural proportions. All my reservations about opening fire were then laid to rest when I see these horns sticking out of its head. They were long, like a Texas longhorn steer's horns. I thought that I had trapped a demon from hell inside my barn, and I wondered if my corporeal weapon would even affect it. Well, I did shoot it. The cloud of pellets stung it good, because it screamed and fell down all the way and landed on its back. It didn't lie still. It scrambled to its feet, unnaturally fast, where I could see then that the horns were in fact ears, and the face was like a hound from hell. Kind of like a Rottweiler almost, but a longer muzzle, and a more fierce face, and a huge hunch in its shoulders. I could tell that if I didn't shoot it, it was going to have my hide. There was an intelligent impulse to murder in this thing's eyes. I know it when I see it. And just like that, it was like a draw in the Old West. Before I could fire off the next shot, that surely would have been fatal to this thing, it vanished. I'm not talking about just one blink and you're gone. I mean, it took off, running faster than the Flash from comic books, sprinting off into the woods. As if that all wasn't strange enough, things got even more weird. You can bet that I was going to call the Smithsonian or the local news or somebody to tell what I had just seen in my own barn. It wasn't more than an hour later that some really slick black vehicles came up my lane and went into my barn like they owned the place. I came out there with something to say about them, just making themselves at home on my property. Especially after the morning I had just had. But when my presence became known, each vehicle door opened, and no less than 3 sharply dressed men came out of each vehicle, and each one of them had a firearm with a long silencer screwed into the barrel. One of them said that they would leave as soon as they got what they needed. And that's what they did. Looked around the area. All 3 walked back into the woods where this thing ran off to, even though there was no evidence of it doing so, that they could see at least, nor did they ask me any questions. On their way back, one of them turned to me and told me I was not to mention anything that was seen or heard of this day, or else there would be serious repercussions. I asked them a bunch of questions, or at least tried to, and they ignored everything. I'm not even going to try and guess what this was all about. Demon dogs killing my animals, and then 3 men in black coming to mop up the mess. This story is as good as yours, and whoever wants to believe me, well, I appreciate your time for reading and hearing me out. I will never forget this one time. I was on my way back to work, early one morning, and I saw something by the side of the road that to this day just makes no sense at all. There I was, driving slowly, and sipping on my morning cup of joe when I saw something by the side of the road. I say something because I am still not entirely sure what it is exactly. My best observation is that it looked like some sort of mix between a dog and a person. At first, I obviously thought it was a dog, because your mind doesn't automatically jump to some sort of weird dog-dude hybrid, right? I also noticed that it appeared to be eating, and again, at first, my mind didn't do an immediate WTF when I noticed. But I could see that there was something unusual, irregular about this animal. As I got closer, I tried my best to figure out what it was. And then, when I noticed, it's like my brain finally clicked into some sort of mode. I almost crashed the car. You see, not only was this a dog, but it was a huge dog. I realized that it was even more unusual than its size. It also appeared to be sitting, so until I was almost on top of it, it didn't fully register just how huge it was. And what was even more unusual was how it was eating, because it wasn't shuffling at something on the floor. It wasn't on four legs or sat with its head bent down. It was sat up, putting food into its mouth with its hands, just like a person would. And that was also when I realized that this particular dog had a very elongated human-like body. Although it was super hairy and had long arms like a person, it was a people dog, dog people, or dog person. I drove slowly past, my mouth hanging wide. I couldn't stop staring. And do you know what went through my mind? I wonder what it's eating. At some point, it must have gotten up and wandered off, as when I looked back in my rearview mirror, it was no longer there. I keep a lighthouse. Yes, an actual lighthouse. I know that a lot of these things just have gone to automation, but it's kind of a relic of our small coastal community that we just can't bear to part with. For the sake of my credentials, I'm gonna stay anonymous, because if my name got out attached to this, I would lose everything. As long as this town is here, there will be a lighthouse and a job for a man that would like to have something to do in his older years, when most of his other obligations towards children and looking after a wife are long over with. That's exactly where I am. My day doesn't involve much more than making sure the light is functioning properly and knocking back whiskey whenever I well please. If I'm feeling really ambitious, I'll make time for other things, but otherwise, I'm just a man that is simply finding a few things to do while I wait out my dwindling time left. Sorry, I don't mean to be melancholy. I had a bit of an incident that made me feel like my time could be up much sooner than I had expected. One of the worst storms I had ever seen had landed on the shore and was going to head into town. So, the lighthouse got it before everyone else did. I swear, I remember hearing the foundation of the building groaning. I wondered if the thing was going to stay upright, and I questioned the value of remaining where I was. But going out into the storm would be suicide, so I was stuck with either death by storm or death by being flattened from inside a collapsing lighthouse. By the way, this lighthouse is incredibly old, built a very long time ago. I had inherited this through family, but again, I don't want to release too much. I distantly wondered if I had any whiskey inside the place, which I try to keep a good stock of. I guess I'm a borderline alcoholic. Sometimes, when a storm is violent enough, it will wash some very interesting things on shore. That storm was no exception. The fact that I'm still telling this story is a testament to the fact that the lighthouse stood its ground and the storm passed without any major incident. I stepped outside when it was safe to inspect the aftermath. The rusty and railed ruined husk of a small ship, perhaps a fishing vessel that had been thrown onto the beach in the night's violence. It was in bad condition that I questioned if it had been above the water when the storm picked it up. It was very tiny, by the way. I'm talking like maybe a 1 or 2 person ship, not an actual industrial fishing boat. There was plenty of barnacles and sea slime, and all other things. I began investigating it, just out of curiosity. It wasn't all that large, but it's not often really anything washes up on shore that isn't a dead sea creature. And just like that, in that very moment, I felt like I was being watched. I started looking around, and that's when I noticed a tall, black shape watching me from the wild grass of the beach, just off to my left, about 100 or 200 yards away. I could barely make out the head. It was black, but I could see tall ears poking out. I started looking and wondered, what the hell? Then, I must have been downwind of this thing, because I started getting a smell like rot, death, and wet dog. Then, the thing behind the grass stood up. And just so you know, if you've ever gone to a beach, there's usually always wild grass off the beach, and this grass is tall, 3 to 4 feet high, so if you get to the right spot, it's easy to hide behind. I don't know why this thing was watching me, or what its plans was, but once it stood up, it was all the more intimidating. It was a showstopper for me. The thing was just standing there, watching me intently. I wasn't exactly sure what to do, but it then turned its entire body while keeping a look at me and walked further back into the grass behind it. I was kind of frozen, unsure what the hell I just saw. This thing was so dark in color, it lacked any real definition. It's like I was watching a moving shadow, a moving silhouette, have you, with that of a dog head and a human body. I nearly retched and vomited on the spot. I fell backwards and clambered to pull myself back up. I wasn't exactly sure what to make of all this. I made a hasty retreat back to the lighthouse and have kept myself pretty well locked up ever since. I have not seen any more sights of that creature or animal, whatever it was. It certainly made me drink a lot more. That I can't deny. I ended up telling some of my grandkids, and they actually listen and watch your channel, which is why they recommended me to send my story over to you. They told me that there's no guarantee that anybody will believe it, but at the very least, there's a good chance my story will get heard. I thank you for your time and giving me the opportunity to share this with you. Do you know how many people go missing in national parks every week? It is an alarming number, and nothing seems to be properly done about it. If you try to bring it up to or mention to somebody in authority, they just simply brush you off, or try to placate you by letting you know it is being looked into. It would be a disturbing read for anybody, I should think, to learn how people go into these places of national interest, beautiful spots, nature havens, but never return. It would be bad enough if I was just reading about it. But the reason I can tell you 100% that this is happening is because my best friend, I'll call her Erica, is one of those missing persons. Obviously, Erica isn't her real name, but I want to keep her real name secret. We just wanted to go hiking, Erica and I, see some nature, get some good exercise, and breathe the fresh air. We parked up, got our backpacks and supplies since we planned to be out all day, and off we went. We were on a part of the Appalachian Trail, and the place we took wasn't exactly remote. We saw several other people in and out during the day, including a park ranger. We were used to doing this kind of thing, and had even planned our own route. We're both relatively fit and healthy. Our only mistake that day was getting a bit carried away with the sights and walking slightly further than we had originally intended, which, of course, meant that the sun was beginning to set as we were on the long trek back to the car. Erica and I have been best friends since junior high, and we always put the world to rights on those walks. As I said, we weren't exactly noobs. We've been hiking and exploring the outdoors for years. We also know what seasons certain animals will be hunted, and indeed, areas to avoid certain predators. So, the first time we heard a funny kind of yelping howl, the only thing we could think of was that somebody was hiking on the trail and had brought a dog, which meant the only worry we had was whether they would pick up any presents left by it, or we would be needing to wipe off our boots. It seemed quite close, too, which did seem a little odd, as there definitely was not any other people around. The yelping began to turn more into a shriek kind of sound. I know that sounds like a really odd way to describe an animal noise, but it really did sound like a scream, but not quite a human scream. It's hard to explain. Needless to say, that got us to move a little quicker. We weren't sure what was making that sound, but we sure as hell didn't want to find out either. Now, here comes the weird part. I don't recall everything, but I will try my best to tell you the bits I do remember, and what I think happened. The sun set way quicker than we had anticipated, and it was pretty dark before we were even halfway back. Still, light enough to see the path, as it was summertime, but certainly not ideal. So the impending darkness and strange animal noises were more than enough to get us on the move. All of a sudden, I was pushed over, shoved from behind. You're probably wondering, why am I so sure of that? Maybe I just tripped. No, I felt a hand or something push me. And needless to say, because it was so unexpected, I fell flat on my face, banging my forehead hard on the ground. I was shocked, hurt, and struggled as I tried to right myself and push back up. I'd fallen a little off the trail too, and it was hard to get my footing. I could hear muffled noises, like panting, and a sort of heavy breathing. I remember thinking, why isn't Erica trying to help? Did she get pushed too? Where is she? I managed to get myself to my knees, and that was when I saw the shape standing behind me. It was nothing like I have ever seen before, and to be honest, I was completely terrified. I must have screamed, and it seemed to echo all around. The thing that shoved me did not look human. It sure was the size of a human, and standing there, looming over me, with the dark night in the back, was like something out of a horror movie. The reason it didn't look human was due to two very distinct things. One, it was covered in gross, matted, reddish-looking hair, and two, it looked like a giant, two-legged coyote, or hyena. It has this awful huge canine-looking head, but more wild like a coyote. But it made that awful high-pitched scream sound. It resembled more of a hyena. It almost seemed to lash out at me, with very human-looking arms, except instead of a hand, it was a paw, complete with claws. Its hands were like half hands of a human, and half dog hands. Kind of similar to a raccoon hand, I guess. I must have passed out at this point, as the next thing I recall, I was being woken up by the ranger. They'd found our car still in the parking lot at 2 a.m. and come out onto the trail, thinking we must have gotten hurt. I was taken straight to the hospital and thankfully only had superficial cuts and bruises and a very slight concussion. They started a search party for Erica, but never found her. Of course, I gave my statements, was questioned up and down, and I even saw the looks they exchanged. She'd been hit on the head and traumatized, and has made this up to cope with the loss of her friend. Why would I do that? I've been out there dozens of times since. I know that thing did something to Erica. I just don't know what. That trail is vast, and those forests and mountains are massive. That thing out there is out there, whatever it is, and I'm sure it's going to take more people. Anyway, I wanted to send this in to you, because I feel like you're really the only last remnant on YouTube who shares people's true, genuine encounters and stories. I know I'm not a great writer, but I felt it was important to sit down, take my time, write out what happened, and send it in to you. Whether you read it or not, I don't care. I just feel like this is more for me. It's a release of trauma and stress, and God knows I need it.